Hi everyone, it's Ruth Hobbs here today for the Property Sisters YouTube channel. I'm here with the lovely Eva Long, who's a heritage consultant. And today we're going to be interviewing her about, how to get into heritage buildings, why are we scared of them, tips and tricks, that kind of thing. So, hi Eva.
Hello.
So just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was a conservation officer for local governments quite a while ago, and I basically spent my time fighting with a lot of architects. People kind of hated you as a conservation officer. The joke is, what's the difference between a conservation officer and a terrorist? You can negotiate with a terrorist. We weren't liked, basically. So after that, I had kids and I started developing, and I seemed to get loads of questions about historic buildings. And I thought, you know what, I'll set up as a heritage consultant. And that's it, yeah. And I just really want to help people who are thinking about buying listed buildings. And I just want to people understand listed buildings and understand how they can work for you and how we can all really sort of benefit the high street, and we can sort of regenerate it. So I'm just here to answer questions.
So I think one thing that developers really struggle with is the fear of taking on a historic building. We like kind of your standard office conversion 70s 80s because you know what you're going to get, and I think most of us just won't take on a heritage building because we think, I haven't got a clue about them, so I'm just going to leave that to somebody else to do. I mean, how can we get over our fear of these buildings? What would you recommend?
Okay, so I think a little bit of fear is actually really good for listed buildings, because you're not dealing with your bog standard 80s, 90s build. They're going to give you challenges along the way. So, and I understand why people are fearful, but it's also through lack of understanding about that building. So they might think that actually listing means you can't touch it, which isn't the case. So every listed building is so different, and it's really understanding kind of why is it special. And it's a case of going through room by room and understanding the significance. And there are some rooms that have absolutely no features in that you can do a lot with, but there are other rooms that have loads of features in. It's like original plan form, and those rooms are more sensitive to changes.
Yeah, so if we took it right back to basics and say, for example, I found a property that I really liked, say it was a conversion and it was above a shop, and it had an historic stair. I mean, one thing I thought is that as a listed building, it's just the front that's listed. Is that right?
Yes, that's a massive preconception. So loads of people think it's just the front. Some people think that there's a listing description in historic England and all the bits written in the listing description are listed and everything isn't. But that's not true either. So everything is listed. The whole thing is listed, even if you've got a 1950s extension, because it's attached to the building, it's also listed. Also structures within the curtilage, so within the site boundary, if you've got structures or walls, they're also listed. So that's really a good idea to know about that.
So it's interesting you mentioned about the website. So do I go to the website? Can I find out more about that listed building from the heritage website?
Yes, so if you think your building may be listed, but any building that you look at, especially buildings in historic centres, because the majority are going to be listed there, go on to Historic England and there's a listing section, type in the address and it will give you a description. So it will describe the date and it might describe some features, but basically that the entire building is listed. And most buildings are grade 2 listed, about 97% are grade 2, only about 2% are grade 1. And obviously the grade 1 buildings, you can do very little because they are so sensitive. Grade 2, it all depends on the building. You may have a building that's been totally gutted in the 60s. There's really no historic interest, and so you can do an awful lot more. But the most important thing is, especially with conversions, is they really don't like seeing you carving up quite principal rooms. So often the first floors, you've got the original layout and the plan, and they don't really like to see you dividing up those main areas. Smaller rooms of lesser importance you can possibly divide up, but they want to still be able to read the original plan of it. Now, I know that some conversions, they want to sort of divide rooms up and they want to put en suites in, and it all depends whether a room's sensitive or not. If it isn't as sensitive and you can put in an ensuite, then going down the route of pods, whereby you've got you don't build right up the ceiling. It's kind of its own entity in itself, and it's a little pod, and it doesn't really affect the plan of the building.
It's like a little mini room in itself,
it's like
isn't
a little
it?
mini room, exactly.
And how would you say that it needs to look, that pod?
So, well, you know, there are different schools of thought. So, often if there are sort of Georgian panel doors, they might say, you know, copy that feature.
Yeah. So it looks like a piece of furniture.
So almost looks like a piece of furniture. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and you talked about the different listings. So it's a 2 or a 1, and there's a 2-star, isn't there, as well?
And there's
what's the difference between those?
Well, the listings are carried out by Historic England, and they've got loads of criteria as to why it's listed and the grade that's listed at. And often, you know, very old buildings, so sort of 14th century churches, because of the age and because of the rarity, they're often grade 1. But, you know, they're listing things like telephone boxes, and they're listing structures in sort of 1960s architecture now. So the listing description should explain why it's listed.
Yeah, that's great. And so let's talk a bit more about the detail of what happens next. So if I find a building that I'd like to convert, you know, I've obviously got my main core team that I use anyway, my architect, which will hopefully have some kind of degree of heritage knowledge already. How does a heritage consultant kind of fit into the whole mesh? What's their what do they have to do in order to get your planning application through, and how can they help you on site?
So it's really good if you're thinking of touching a listed building or even a heritage building that you've got an architect who's got experience in that area. Ideally, an architect who's got a good working relationship with the local conservation officer. Now, I know that, you know, councils are being hit financially, and so there are some counties that actually haven't got any conservation officers, and getting pre-application advice is really difficult. So because of that, getting an architect who knows about historic buildings is really useful. If you don't have that, going down the route of a heritage consultant. So basically the first thing that you do is you go into that building and assess the significance of the building. So you identify, and I do it using sort of different colours, you identify areas that can be altered. There are not a lot of historic features, down to rooms that absolutely really shouldn't be touched. And then that will then inform the planning side of it. So then you're aware, you know which walls are historic, which ones aren't, and then that should then inform how it's converted. And
then you've got things like the door schedule as well. That's another area, not important area to take photos of before whether they're.
So all planning application, well, all listed building consent application forms require you to submit a heritage statement and an impact assessment. So that's basically, they want to see a photograph of every single room, including all the doors, and then they want to understand how the alterations will affect that room.
Yeah.
But it really is, it shouldn't be subjective, but you know, it's a conservation officer's opinion as to whether that alteration is acceptable or not. But there are ways that you can get around it. So for example, if a conservation officer really doesn't want to see you divide a room up, then there are ways that you can argue that it won't affect the historic corner scene, and you could always sort of put glazing at the top level just to show that actually this is a modern wall.
So so what I was going to say? I was going to say councils often, every council's different, aren't they?
Yes.
And so what I found really interesting was that Derby City Council, for instance, like a certain particular type of heritage report, you know, one that you did for us, Eva.
Yeah,
and
I do.
They like you to do it in a certain way with certain diagrams, and you wouldn't know that if you didn't know, right? Because there's no kind of rule book on this. There's no kind of, you've got to do this, you've got to do that.
Yeah, you're right.
And the one thing that you want to avoid happening is for them to keep batting the application back to you, A, because you haven't got it validated, and B, because, you know, you haven't provided everything. And especially with COVID, the heritage people on the council side are not going out to visit any sites.
No,
so
you're right.
it's possible that, you know, it's about, you have to give them volumes of information.
Yeah, that's it. And much more so than just doing a normal conversion to a normal house. So this is when that architect is really key, actually, because if they've had experience with historic buildings, they know the conservation officer, they know what the conservation is going to ask for, and they know what information you need. So it's back to getting the right people on the job.
And I think the other thing that our architect did really well was that he would push back when we would just ask for too much. You know, I would say, just get it done. But actually he would go, well, no, because actually...
Can't this be conditioned? Or...
We can condition this, you know, we pushed back several times, you know, on the double glazing to say that, you know, we didn't know what double glazing we were going to use until we got the builders on site and to work all that level of detail out. So, you know, that's really helpful as well, having that kind of, that pushback. Cause,
definitely.
Yeah,
because they can, you know, the conservation officers nowadays just don't have time to go on site. They don't have time for pre-apps, so they will ask for all the information under the sun, basically. But the most important thing is they want to see visually which parts of the building are important and which aren't as important, so that they can make informed decisions.
And that, it comes back to your kind of heritage statement at the beginning. That's why it's so important.
So important.
All those photographs, you get in there and you spend the day taking photographs of absolutely everything. And we had to drill those mini holes, didn't we? Do you remember?
We had to drill some mini holes to check whether, you know, it was a modern timber style
how do you
plaster.
Because sometimes you just can't tell, can you?
No, I mean it can be really difficult. So I'm working on one at the moment, and it's because there's some Victorian skirting boards, so it's more likely to be lath and plaster, you know. But when you've got no corner seam, no skirting boards, it is difficult. Yeah. So then that needs to, you then need to apply to do some more invasive drilling. But you need to get the okay from the conservation officer really before you start drilling holes into walls.
I mean, what I found a little bit annoying was that, you know, these buildings have been, you know, the ones we're looking at have been empty for years and years and years, and you know, me and Eva haven't seen eye to eye all the time on the buildings and I feel that that's a really healthy way to approach buildings, because you want to get the best out of a building, but how I look at it as a developer isn't necessarily how they're looking at it from a conservation point of view. So it's a question of meeting in the middle and bringing that building back into use, but also honouring the heritage side of the building too. And I think that's what I've learned on the few buildings that we've done now. So
yeah, you've got the extremes, you know, you've got me who knows the legislation, knows what should be approved, what shouldn't be approved, what needs consent, what doesn't need consent. And then you've got the planning officer who ultimately will make the decision. And it's really, it's the conservation officer's role in the council to look at the heritage statement, but also look at the condition of the building and understand the local plan and understand, well, if this is the only viable use to bring this building back into use, then actually we've got to go for it. And if these alterations don't significantly harm the structure, then they've got to be pragmatic about it, haven't they?
And so sometimes you look at a building that has had alterations, like a UPVC window. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, so one key point to remember is if you're looking around a listed building and you notice there are some UPVC windows which would never get consent. So if you notice these PVC windows, you know that they haven't got consent. So if you take on that building, if you're the owner, then you are liable to reverse that change. So the council can come up to you and say, right, we've got evidence that these windows have changed without consent and we want you to put them back at your own expense. Now, that actually rarely happens. You know, they don't have time to chase you. However, you can use that as a bargaining tool to reduce your price, to reduce your asking price. So if you notice alterations without consent, you can say, look, we could be liable to put them back. It would cost this amount of money, and then take that off the asking price.
Yeah. What was interesting on our planning approval was that they made it as a condition that they would give us planning consent if we change those windows out. So they didn't push us to say you've got to change them. They were very kind of, even though the legislation says we have to, they didn't say that. They said we'll grant you planning, you know, this is a condition. So
to change them,
which is really interesting, isn't it? Because they're not coming in heavy-handed. There, you know, it just shows you they want to work with you and they want to get these built on.
They really do want to work with you, you know, and they're sort of hoping as well, because as we know, if you convert listed buildings into residential uses, I mean, they have a lot higher, you know, their value is a lot higher actually than your normal houses. So they do command higher rents, higher yields. And I think to do that, you want to put back historic features, don't you? You want to take out those plastic windows and put back your traditional sashes, you know, for your own yield, for your own value.
Yeah, it's quite a small cost anyway when you're looking at that kind of window replacement in the whole scheme of things, right?
Yeah.
So,
and holistically, the buildings just look a lot better.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thanks ever so much, Eva,
You're welcome.
for your tips and everything. We're going to be coming back for a session again with you, Eva, just to really drill down into those tips and tricks for heritage. So we're going to come back in a few weeks' time and do another video. But I just want to say thank you ever so much.
Pleasure.